Hello everyone. In this video, we'll deal with an issue which has been a bone of contention between the left and the right since ages. I'm talking about labor reforms. Firstly, some provisions on labor reforms. On labor. Labor laws are under the concurrent list, which means the state as well as the center can make laws on it. DPSP Article 43A says that enjoins the government to secure the participation of workers in the management of undertakings, establishments or other organizations. So basically this is like the epitome of labor welfare, where they're actually participating in the management of undertakings, which at this point of time is quite a distant dream, I would say. Now, one thing you must remember and memorize is the Chapter 5B of IDA. IDA is the Industrial Disputes Act, and the Chapter 5B of that is that the industries employing more than 100 people cannot terminate employment without government approval. So this obviously has been the major issue which has plagued industry in India, which the industry people say has really led to industries not being able to flourish in India, and there has been a constant demand of removing this particular provision. Okay, to give you an overview of the gamut of legislation which regulates labor and their working conditions, you can look at this. Again, you don't need to remember this is just to give you an overview. To regulate the working hours and the conditions of service, we have the Factories Act, the Contract Labor Act, Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, and also there are industry specific acts. Like there's an act for mining workers, there's an act for newspaper vendors, there's an act for all sorts of industries. Similarly, to regulate industrial relations, we have the Trade Unions Act, the Industrial Disputes Act. For salary, we have Payment of Wages Act, Minimum Wages Act, Payment of Bonus Act. Social Security has Workmen Compensation Act, Employee State Insurance Act, Provident Fund Act, Gratuity Act. For women specifically, we have the Maternity Benefits Act and Equal Remuneration Act. So as you can see, we have a lot of laws in this country which regulate labor and their working conditions. And if you look at the years in which they came, a lot of these acts are actually pre-independence or quite old. So they have not kept pace with the changing conditions of the industry and the working conditions of the workers. Now, a drop side of all this legislation is that there is a growth in the informal sector. Informal sector is that part of the economy that is not taxed or monitored by any form of government, unlike the formal sector. So what this means is that whenever the size of an organization or an entity becomes larger than a specified number, we have all these legislations kicking in. So sometimes the employers or the organizations feel that it's better to keep a smaller size so that these legislations don't come in, because there's a regulatory and compliance cost associated with these legislations. So if we have let us say the Provident Fund Act, obviously you will have to make provisions for the Provident Fund. Not only is it a monetary cost, it is also a compliance cost in terms of keeping records. So you need to maintain your records, there will be government checks, there will be inspections. So there are various kind of costs associated with every legislation to regulate the labor sector. Now the informal sector is extra legal because it's not really recognized by the law as such, but they're not required, and hence they're not required to keep financial records. They do not pay high taxes. They are generally in the lowest tax slab and they're exempted from a lot of other taxes. They have low setup and entry requirements. So low setup costs and entry requirements, again because they do not have these fixed charges of these like maintaining records, etc. So it's very easy for them to come in, and also it is easy for them to go out of business, because I told you right in the beginning that there is a regulation wherein if you have more than 100 workers, you cannot fire them without government approval. Now this is not the case in the informal sector. So that is because they have a small scale of operations with very few workers. And normally they are labor intensive in nature, because they are very small time shop kind of places where there's not a lot of use of machinery, but a lot of work is done by labor, but they are smaller in size overall. Now you can see this in this graph that we're showing all the three sectors, the agriculture, services and industry sector. In agriculture, 98% of the employment or the people engaged in agriculture are in the informal sector. Obviously this is very easy to understand because agriculture does not have any formal sector to speak of. But if you look at the industry and services, that is more informative. In the industry, 75% of all the the industrial sector is in the informal sector. So this is by employment. So 75% of the employment is in the informal sector. In services as well, 72% is in the informal sector. So the point is that in the informal sector, the labor get absolutely no protection. They have no regulation of their service conditions. They do not get their basic benefits which they should get. So someone has said that informal employment is the slavery of the 21st century. Yet India's labor laws declare war on formal employment. So what they mean is that India's labor laws are so stringent that it is very, very difficult for any entity to become a formal entity, and they would try to avoid it as far as possible. So obviously the only alternative is the informal sector, which has resulted in, as you can see, a very predominant influence of the informal sector in the economy. In fact, 100% of the net job creation in the last 20 years has happened informally. That's a sort of a startling piece of information. 100% of net job creation has been in the informal sector. So now with the new government, there's been a lot of talk of labor reforms. So what kind of reforms are we talking about? First, there's a Shram Suvidha portal. We'll get into the details of each of these, but just to give you an overview. Random inspection scheme, universal account number, apprentice protsahan yojana, and a revamped Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. Okay, so look at the Shram Suvidha portal. First of all, the compliance reports. For wherever there is a labor law, there has to be a compliance. Now, obviously, compliance can happen in two ways. One is somebody goes and checks your organization and says, well, you're doing everything right, and we give you a compliance certificate that you're doing fine. Now, the thinking right now in the government is about self-certification. So they say we have no need to doubt you till you are found to be doing something wrong. So if you say that we have complied with this particular law, we will agree to that, unless you are found to be wanting at a later stage. So what Shram Suvidha portal is doing is that it is allowing e-filing of your compliance report. It is a single unified compliance report for 16 labor laws, and it is based on the principle of self-certification. So also it allows labor identification numbers to 6 lakh forms. This is basically how the working of the portal goes. But you need to understand that it is a e-filing system which has a single window for 16 labor laws, and it works on the principle of self-certification. This cuts down the compliance cost a lot. Even though the monetary cost of complying is the same, but the hassle cost and the other inspection, when there's an inspection, there's a chance of corruption, and those kind of costs reduce a lot. Okay, now there's been a lot of talk of Inspector Raj. India was, infamous for having Inspector Raj, where an inspector from the government would go and inspect your entity, and invariably he would demand some money for either some small lacking on your part, or even if there isn't, just to give you an okay report. So it has already come down a lot, but there is still a long way to go. So what the government is now thinking is that earlier the inspection was at the discretion of labor inspectors. So let us say there are two entities, one which is doing absolutely everything wrong and one which is doing everything right. But one who is doing everything wrong, let us say, bribes the labor inspector and says, please don't come visit us. So the labor inspector says okay, and the other firm which is doing everything right, or let us say 90% things right, he doesn't bribe the labor inspector. So the labor inspector will go to his firm and threaten him with giving a wrong inspection report, which would obviously mean a lot of cost for this entity B. So this entity B ends up either bribing the labor inspector or getting a wrong report. So this means there was a lot of discretion in the hands of the labor inspector. And on top of that, the inspections were not happening properly, because if the inspections would have happened properly, the first entity which escaped by giving a bribe to the inspector should have been inspected and he should have been brought to book. So now the system which is being envisaged and implemented is that there is a computerized system which randomly selects the company on the basis of objective criteria and data trends. So the data of all the companies is fed in a system, and the system will automatically select which company should be inspected based on, let us say, some parameters which could be, let's say, the tax to income ratio, which might signify that this company is not paying as much tax as should be paid, or other parameters like the number of employees or whatever be it. But it is random selection by a computer. Also, the matching of the company with the inspector is again random. So it's not that, okay, Inspector A chooses to visit company A. Some Inspector Z might be randomly allocated to a company O. So the whole system of making settings with the inspectors or not inspecting a company, all this is effectively done away with. So once this random matching is done, the labor inspector goes for inspection, and he needs to upload reports within 72 hours and cannot modify them thereafter. So earlier what used to happen was the inspector would first of all issue a negative report and say that okay, these are all the things you're not complying with. So after seeing the report, the company would get threatened and would probably pay a bribe to the inspector, which would then result in the correction of a report. So obviously I'm not trying to say that in all the cases this used to happen, but this was this is a recurring complaint by the industry. So now if they upload the reports within 72 hours and cannot modify them, the chances of this sort of thing happening goes down a lot. So this is the thinking of the government. Okay, the other initiatives, there's a universal account number. So 4.17 crore employees to get portable provident fund accounts. So if they shift jobs or they are transferred or whatever be it, so it is very easy for them to take their benefits along with them. Another thing is the apprentice protsahan yojana. This means that 50% stipend in the first 2 years are reimbursed by the government. So this is done by amending the Apprenticeship Act and modernizing the ITI. Now basically there's a lot of emphasis by the government on skill development. So whenever there's skill development, it basically means that there is apprenticeship. So you train people in doing something using the ITIs, and after that they are placed in a sort of an apprentice role. Now when they are placed in the apprentice role, 50% of the stipend which is to be paid to them in the first 2 years is being reimbursed by the government. So this is basically to encourage the apprenticeship and skill development. Also, the government is launching a revamped Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. This is basically a social security scheme, and more social security schemes are being added into it. We won't get into too much details at this stage. Also, increased labor hours are being provided for. So, there have been amendments to the Factory Act, which includes increasing the limit of overtime for workers from 50 hours per quarter to 100 hours per quarter. So, it's giving more flexibility to the companies and the employees to do overtime if they so desire. So we are saying, okay, let us not say how much you can work and how much you cannot. If the employee wants to work and the company wants them to work, then the government has no business telling them that they should not. So what is the benefit of this all? First of all, it is boosting transparency. Like I said, the random matching and the e-filing, the self-compliance, all this is leading to increased transparency, which will create a business-friendly environment and improve the manufacturing climate. So as we've discussed in various other videos, the government really wants to increase the manufacturing, and we told you that they're trying to create an ecosystem rather than just giving sops here and there. So this will go a long way in creating that ecosystem. In fact, Vasundhara Raje just said that this is creating a fertile habitat for job creation. So this basically talks about the same ecosystem thing. Okay, although a lot is being done, there are still certain pending reforms. So hiring and firing is, like I said, has been a very ticklish issue, the chapter 5B of IDA. So the government is in talks with trade unions to enable easier hiring and firing of workers, at least in the national manufacturing zones. So even if they are not able to do away with this thing for the whole of India, they want the regulation to be loosened in the NMIZs. So Rajasthan has already amended by raising the exemption limit for government permission to up to 300 workers. So only if you have more than 300 workers do you need to take permission from the government when you want to fire people. So the logic of this is that 300 secure jobs are better than 400 shaky ones, because if you don't do this, the company runs the risk of bankruptcy, and then it might shut down altogether. So instead of that, it's better to allow them to fire some people and remain profitable. Also, trade unions have, the traditional thinking behind the trade unionism was that the labor should be allowed to organize themselves, because labor has been an exploited segment of the economy for almost all countries. And because they are separate and disjointed, they cannot put up the demands with the required force in front of the management. Obviously, management have a lot of muscle power in terms of money and government support and a lot of other things, which the labor do not. So that is when they decided, the governments and the labor decided that there should be trade unions who would then put their demands in front of the management and lobby or really bargain with them for the rights of the labor. But along the line, the trade unions also got plagued with a lot of problems. There was politicization of unions and mafia unionism, where underworld elements got involved in trade unions, which really compromised the interest of the labor on one hand and also blackmailed and threatened the company management on the other. So another reform which is really required is reform in the trade union law. It should make trade unions more representative, because at the end of the day we require democracy in all wakes, trade unions being one, and there should be decreasing of the politicization of trade unions and mafia unionism. Now a lot is being done by the government, as is clear from this video, but there's still some criticisms left. First of all, the Factories Act. Now what we've done is we've raised the threshold of coverage from 10 workers to 20 workers in factories operating with power, and 20 to 40 in factories not using power. What this means is the Factories Act does not apply to companies with less than 20 workers if they are operating with power. So a lot of companies which come under this, companies with, let's say, 15 workers with power, or let us say 30 workers without power, are not being covered by the Factories Act, which means labor of these companies, which is a huge lot, is actually not being covered by any benefits. So a major criticism by the left is that this really compromises the position of labor. Also, Apprenticeship Act, it is said that it is legalizing exploitation, as companies could use employees as trainees for long duration, and get away with paying 70% of the minimum wages, because stipend is you do not require to give minimum wages. In stipends you can give only up to 70% of minimum wages. So this is another issue. Apprenticeship is fine if it is also in the spirit of apprenticeship. If you're trying to use regular workers as apprentices and not paying the minimum wages, obviously it is not a very happy situation. And also contract workers and casual workers, the provident fund issue that I discussed, that you can transfer your PF accounts, etc., all these are available only to regular workers. But the key issue that is not addressed is that the non-delivery of PF dues for contract and casual workers who are really in a vulnerable position has not been dealt with really properly till now. So this is an overview of the labor legislation and how, what are the expectations of the various segments from labor laws. I hope you've gained a basic understanding of the same. Thank you for watching the video. Hope you liked it. Comments and suggestions are welcome. Thank you.